Welcome to Slow Night, Ancient Tales. Tonight I will be sharing a profound and somber classic from Korean literature, The Age of Youth by Lee Hyo-seok. It is a story steeped in the quiet chill of coastal fog, following a young man as he navigates the harsh realities of poverty and the heartbreaking sorrow of lost love. As the cold night embraces the world, let us walk alongside him through the misty apple orchards and feel the quiet resilience blooming within his shattered heart. Allow the worries of your waking hours to fade into the fog. Take a slow, deep breath, and let the story begin. The Age of Youth. Author. Source Samcholi, 1930. Even as the sun shines, fog rolls in from the sea. The purplish fog, spreading shallowly across the vast open field and creeping in stealthily, resembles some kind of animal. The blue roof of the principal's residence, clad in the fog, looks as if it belongs to another world. The practice field looks exceptionally vast today, and the figures of the animals working in the fog seem terribly sluggish. Although it is the season for apple blossoms to bloom, the weather is cold enough to make one shiver in their practice uniform. Plunging the pitchfork deep into the compost and lifting it, steam billows out and a warm energy rises. Burying his feet in it, a rather comforting warmth wraps around his body and rises. Haksu limply collapsed right on top of it. He wanted to bury his whole body in it and inhale the warm scent of the compost to his heart's content. You must be tired. Muno, who had been standing and watching Haksu's lifeless movements, patted Haksu's shoulder, took away his pitchfork, and started loading the compost into the hand barrow instead. You didn't eat lunch either, did you? Omitted. If it's just an experiment for our academic subjects, a small practice plot would suffice. Is there really a need to farm such a vast piece of land? Omitted. Muttering as if to himself, Muno finished loading the compost and said, "Here, let's just go dump this and then take a rest." Haksu got up powerlessly and shouldered one end of the hand barrow. The third family's practice assignment for today was the clearing of the second hotbed. On the way to the hotbed, Haksu counted in his head the number of hand barrows they had carried over the past hour. It was the 17th. They were not allowed to slack off even a little bit during that time. Just as they dumped the compost into the newly being made hotbed, the rest bell rang. It takes every ounce of my strength. If only I could quit this practice, I'd do absolutely anything else. A third-year student, who had been digging the site for the new hotbed nearby, threw his shovel and jumped out of the pit. He was also among the group that hadn't eaten lunch. Wiping the flowing sweat with the back of his hand and flicking it away, he hurriedly walked towards the water tap to quench his thirst. Scattered in every corner of the practice field surrounding the school on all four sides, the 300 or so students had been out of sight, but when break time came, they swarmed together, surrounding the tap in front of the school, instantly buzzing with life. Few people from the groups assigned to the hotbeds went there. Most simply collapsed where they were to cool their sweat. Haksu and Muno, both fourth-year students and exceptionally close friends, did not separate and sank to the ground in their practice uniforms. The apple blossoms have bloomed. An apple tree in the front field vaguely entered his unfocused field of vision. As his gaze gradually centered on the white flowers, the concept of apple blossoms newly surfaced in his mind. Wait, on a dead branch. It was so bizarre as he watched that Haksu stood up and went over to it. Sure enough, a flower was blooming on a dry, dead branch. While he was marveling at that unfathomable growth of life, a voice called from behind, making him turn around. Chang-gu, a classmate who had been practicing at the southern farm, stood next to the hotbed. "You're admiring the flowers." Smiling broadly, he said, "How wonderful it must be for someone to get married when the apple blossoms are blooming." Another friend, who was sitting and pointlessly tapping his hoe handle, said as if suddenly remembering, "Ah, right, I hear Gumok is getting married soon." Chang-gu chimed in. "Another one of the village's prides is disappearing. When Duhyeon crossed over to Wimes, we lost one pride of the village, and now we are losing another a must figure of our village. We probably won't be able to see her slender figure carrying a water jar and disappearing behind the fence anymore either. They say the groom is a rice merchant living in time. Since Gumoke's family has been poor, at least they won't starve now." We're sad too, but imagine how Haksu must feel, considering they were affectionate with each other. Smiling broadly, Changsu looked at Haksu. In his empty stomach, sad memories revived, making Haksu dizzy and his mind blurred. Aren't you frustrated, chasing after a pipe dream? But what can you do when they say they won't give her to a poor student? At Changu's innocent yet cruel remark, Haksu suddenly felt faint, lost consciousness, and collapsed on the spot. As Haksu collapsed stiffly with a pale, bloodless face, Muno swiftly ran over and caught him from behind. Changu ran over and grabbed his legs. What's going on? The watching friends rushed over in a throng. He sometimes has bouts of anemia. Hunger, practice labor, and anguish. Being tossed about in all this is a shortcut to fainting. They hovered around anxiously, crowding the poor friend to support him in any way they could. I was just babbling for no reason. My teasing must have gone too far. Unable to hide his guilt, Changu spoke as if apologizing repeatedly, and together with Muno, carried the stiff Haksu towards the night duty room. Friends from other groups followed along, puzzled. A couple of supervising teachers saw this from afar and hurried over. They brought him to the night duty room, laid him down, and elevated his legs. While they loosened his shirt completely and moistened his chest with water to cool it down, color gradually returned to his face. In less than 10 minutes, when the doctor arrived, Haksu had recovered and opened his eyes. After drinking about half a glass of wine poured by the doctor, he regained his senses. His head was still throbbing, but feeling embarrassed, Haksu sprang up. I can finally relax. You scared us half to death. Changu smiled, seemingly truly relieved. I won't say such idle things again. I will tell the supervising teacher, so quit the practice for today and lie down some more. Muno left Haksu alone and went back to the practice field with Changu. Feeling awkward staying alone in the night duty room, Haksu hurried out and went to the incubator duty room, where he felt more at ease. Lying in the warm, empty room, various thoughts and emotions overflowed from his narrow chest. A fate worse than a chick's. The flock of chicks chirping and running around in the coop at the upper end of the room, Haksu thought his fate was worse than theirs. Chicks wouldn't have the same agony as I do, would they? Outside the window, a slender willow tree was visible. The smooth willow tree growing freely as it pleased, Haksu thought his fate was worse than that too. There was too much suffering for a young man like him, who should be growing up innocently without a care. Those various agonies entirely snapped his smoothly growing spirit. Harassed by his wretched circumstances, his spirit was broken and his will crushed. Gomoke, losing her, with whom he had shared affection, was a great sorrow to both of them. On the night they met in the apple orchard outside the fortress walls, Gomoke cried, and he cried too. But Haksu's suffering continued even at school. Poverty and lack of freedom, these spawned all kinds of agonies and trampled the thoughts of his young soul. While he was thinking, something hot welled up in his eyes. It kept flowing out, one drop after another. Usually, after shedding enough tears, one's body feels lighter, but as long as the sorrowful dark clouds in his heart did not disperse, the tears poured down endlessly like rain. Through his blurred tears, Haksu saw the distorted face of Muno, who had come in after finishing the practice. Don't get too worked up. His dizzy, disheveled state looked quite pitiful in Muno's eyes. Because of Gumoke? More than that, I've come to hate school. Did you just start hating school today? Who comes to school because they like it? School is a place you come to blindly without any will, like a machine moving. But it's not like you have any other options if you don't come to school. It's not a place to run and play happily. It's a place that dees people. They tell us to be close to the soil, but omitted, can we really be close to the soil? I want to go far away, anywhere. And do what once you go. In this world right now, it's miserable wherever you go. Where would you find a comfortable place? It's just that it's too agonizing. What would your family do if you left? Just bear with it, and let's stay as long as we can. Shall we go hang out at Yonggyal's tonight? Muno took Haksu and left the duty room. Morning. During the morning assembly, after the attendance report for each grade was finished, the principal strode up to the podium. The solemnly lined up ranks of some 300 students tensed up for a moment. Whenever the principal had an address, 600 eyes full of half worry and half curiosity would focus on the podium. I warn you about this every month, but the moment he heard the first words, which rang out like a broken tin sheet, Hak-soo could easily guess the next words. Every single time, there are many who haven't paid their tuition, making accounting extremely difficult. It was exactly as he had guessed. Every month, whenever he heard these words, Hak-soo felt as depressed as a sinner. Though it was a sum of merely a few won a month, it was a heavy burden for the sons of poor farming families. Whenever the principal issued his reprimands, Hak-soo's heart shrank like a sheep being beaten. If you do not submit it within this week, I will resolutely take disciplinary action. So. It was a formulaic sentence they always heard, but it made Hak-soo's heart ache and worry. He felt depressed all day. In a situation where they couldn't even eat regular meals decently, there was absolutely no way to scrape together that much money. Just thinking about his old father's soot-blackened figure, who suffered month after month, made his heart ache. The pitiful sight of his father, bent like a pine tree from carrying the burden of their poor household, stuck in his mind like a picture and wouldn't fade away. The pig they had carefully raised for a year had been sold off a little over a month ago, pressed by taxes. They had no choice but to sell the precious pig, which they had planned to raise for another year and sell next spring to rent a few more furrows of a potato field. That was how fiercely the demands for taxes had hounded them. Hak-soo still remembered that day vividly. In the end, a clerk from the township office came dragging a sulgi cart. His mother hurled curses, even though she knew it was useless. His father sat in the front yard, his face dark, silently puffing deeply on his tobacco. When the cart rolled out the front gate, loaded with their seized cooking pot, his mother followed it to the corner of the fence, screaming and crying. Left with no choice, his father sold off their cherished pig the next day, and his mother didn't touch a spoonful of food for 3 meals. Hak-soo could never forget the events of that time. With no pig left, what am I going to do about this month's tuition? After bearing a half-day's worth of worry, he returned home, but his father, who had gone to the fields, had not yet returned. While he was gripping a hoe and tending the vegetable patch in the front yard, his father returned. But seeing his tired and drained state, Hak-soo couldn't muster the courage to torment him further with bothersome words. As they sat facing their meager dinner table, his father was the first to open his heavy mouth. "Has anything special happened at school lately?" "It's always the same. Study hard. You need to get a job as soon as you graduate. With my old body, I can't manage this household much longer." Because those were such sincere words, Hak-soo paradoxically couldn't find an appropriate response. "The weather is nasty, so it looks like the farming will be a disaster again this year. I need to buy a few bags of fertilizer and spread them, but it's a big problem. Last year, Foreman Choi raised a huge fuss, saying I ruined the land because I couldn't apply fertilizer, and we only barely managed to rent it for 1 more year this year by begging and begging, right?" Hak-soo grew depressed again and put his spoon down halfway through his meal. "No matter what, there's no other way but to buy another pig and raise it. Raising chickens isn't enough. There's nothing else but a pig. Did the school's pig give birth?" His father talked and discussed everything with his son, his only flesh and blood. But in front of his father, who was out of his mind with farming worries, Hak-soo couldn't bring himself to mention the tuition. He drank some water and ran out of the room. When the night grew late, Hak-soo caught the eye of Gomok, who had come to draw water from the well outside the fence, and they silently agreed to meet outside the fortress walls. Because the moon was so bright, they separated, and Hak-soo went outside the walls first, leaning against the back of the hut in the apple orchard and waiting for Gumoko to come out. The full moon was as white as a gourd. At the edge of the field, the sea, along with the profound sound of its waves, was distant in the vague night. The shadow of the hut, with its sharp outlines, stretched out black as some animal into the apple orchard, and within it an apple tree stood tall, its leaves and flowers sharing the same bluish hue. The colors of a moonlit night are not strictly limited to white and the color of ink wash. The subtle colors woven by moonlight and nightlight, Nature wears this over its realistic colors and reveals itself. This is undeniably a mystical adornment removed from reality. However, a moonlit night is not just about this mystical color either. Beyond color, it certainly harbors a kind of unique fragrance. The unknowable, profound fragrance of the night. Because this exists, the moonlit night is even more beautiful. This ancient moonlit night that humanity has possessed since prehistoric times, its light never fading just because it is ancient, always beautiful like a magnificent classic. However, to the much tormented Haksu, the beautiful appearance of this moonlit night did not register in his mind anew. Thoughts of Gumok came before the moon. On the last night they were meeting, he wanted to cast all other thoughts aside, think only of Gumok to his heart's content, and neatly fold that beautiful and heartbreaking last memory into his heart. Gumok appeared between the apple trees across from the hut, her slender figure towering in a color like that of apple blossoms, and her strands of hair soaked in the moonlight. Seeing these for the last time made them look even more beautiful than any time he had seen them before. I barely managed to slip out. As if shunning the overly bright moonlight, Gumoko covered her face with the back of her hand and drew closer. Lately, for some reason, the family members have started closely watching my every move. The day is approaching, so they must be constantly urging me to be careful with myself. Haksu took Gumok's hand and said, "There are only a few days left. Please, stop saying that. What are your thoughts waiting for that day? You are teasing me." Teasing? Do I even have the right to tease you, Gumoke? You're jabbing a needle into an already sorrowful heart. Who is jabbing whose heart? If you're going to mock a body being sold off, then please somehow dispose of me before that day comes. Ah, what should I do? Is there anyone else as powerless and foolish as me? Even before he could finish his words, the tears Haksu had been holding back burst out. His voice grew loud and he wailed like a child. Gumoke's face, too, glistened in the moonlight. She had already been shedding tears from before, trying to hide them from Haksu's eyes. Please dispose of me somehow. She barely spoke through a sobbing voice and buried her face deep into Haksu's chest. Her crying suddenly grew louder. Dispose of you? What power or means do I have right now? Running away, that's something that only happens in stories. How could we do that with empty hands? Haksu tore at his chest. If even that is impossible, there are only two paths left. I cannot disobey the wishes of my pitiful family, so I can either quietly wait for that day or I can end my own life. Gumok's voice trembled. Haksu could tell from the feel of her face touching his hands that she had noticeably lost weight over the past few days. Her jawline had grown extremely thin and her wrists had become shockingly slender. What am I supposed to do? Haksu writhed as if his agonizing heart had been ripped out. It seems human affairs just go however they're bound to go. This might be the very last time we meet. Even amidst her crying, Gomoke's demeanor was unnaturally calm. As if dropping the curtain on a play with no resolution, the moon hid within the clouds and the sound of the waves suddenly roared. The hem of Gumoko's tear-soaked skirt wilted like a pear blossom. In the dreadful agony and despair of having abandoned everything, Gumok's wedding day approached. After that night, they met at the hut in the apple orchard. Haksu faced that day without ever seeing Gumok again. Clutching his wailing heart, with no intention of going to school, he went out to the seaside from the morning. As if out of some spite, it was coincidentally wonderful weather. The sunlight was so brilliantly radiant that Haksu found it difficult to lift his face straight up. The gently blossoming leaves sparkled like silver dust. His eyes were dazzled by the fragments of waves that gathered thickly and shattered. The smell of sardines, the smell of seaweed, an overly strong scent of the sea flowed into his exhausted chest. Fishing boats came into the harbor, and the loud, bustling sounds of people, the song of living, drifted from afar. By the water's edge, devoid of any human trace, there was nothing but sunlight, wind, and the sound of waves. The overly deep color of the endless, distant sea made it feel as if his pupils, his entire body, were being dyed blue. Sitting with both legs stretched out, Haksu picked up sand and tossed it into the sea, reminiscing about the various scenes of playing by the water with Gumoko. As if trying to bury all his past into the sea along with the thrown sand, He now had no tears left and no cries came out. Only his insides were crackling and burning, to the point where even the sea breeze felt inadequate to cool them. He pulled out a poetry book of Heine that he had carried in his pocket. He wanted to repeat Heine, which they had read together until the pages wore out when he and Gumo-ke spoke of their first love one last time. With that, he intended to bring down the curtain on his sorrowful first love. Countless songs of love and songs of disappointment, the songs of disappointment that he used to read without any real feeling, now resonated in his chest with distinct emotion. When he reached the following poem, he read it twice, 3 times over. It was precisely the expression of Haksu's own affections and the tombstone of the grave where his love was buried. The old, worn-out tunes and notes of songs and all the branches of dreams that torment the heart, now I shall bury them all away. Bring that huge coffin, and bring 12 strong men. 12 strong men, sturdier than the statue of Saint Christopher in the Cathedral of Cologne. Have the men carry the coffin and cast it deep into the sea. To bury such a large coffin, a massive grave would be needed indeed. He was about to conclude his sorrow right there and close the book, but drawn by the power of the poetry, he kept turning the pages more and more. The day passed and the sun tilted. It was around the time when Gumok, with rouge on her cheeks and her eyes closed, would be sitting face to face with the groom under the awning, receiving the wedding table. Haksu lay on the sand, completely absorbed in the poetry, without even stirring. With the tip of a slender reed I wrote on the sand, "Agnes, I love you," but a malicious wave came surging in and relentlessly washed away this beautiful confession of my heart. O weak reed, O soft sand, O fragile wave, I can already no longer trust you. As it grows dark, my heart begins to race. With a mighty grip shall I pluck the largest fir tree from the forests of Norway, dip it into the blazing volcano of Etna, and with that grand, glowing red brush, vigorously write across the dark heavens? Agnes, I love you. Haksu read this poem over and over, more than 10 times. The more he read, an unknowable grand excitement swelled up. He changed Agnes to Gum-ok, and then tried changing it to various other things. He tried comrade. He put in this land. Later, he changed it to the world. A magnificent emotion, which he couldn't quite put a finger on to describe, surged fully within his chest. Shall I pluck the largest oak tree from the peak of Mount Baekdu, heat it glowing red with the passion in this chest, and vigorously write across the dark heavens? Oh, something, I love you! Kicking the sand, Haksu sprang up. The darkening sea was unfathomably distant, and his entire body grew damp from the ceaselessly flying spray of the waves. That night, Haksu went to visit Yonggyol, whom he hadn't seen since he visited with Muno a few days ago. It was partly to return a few books he had borrowed a long time ago. Yonggyol, who had been absorbed in reading, turned his body away from his desk and welcomed Haksu. In the small room, books with covers of various colors were stacked to the brim on all 4 sides. The arrangement of those books frequently changed like the orientation of clouds. The letters in the thick book open on the desk were dimly black, and his friend's passion contained behind his horn-rimmed glasses shone pitch black. Those eyes shining with passion. It was those eyes that always drew Haksu's heart with a sea-like charm. They were deep, radiant, and reliable eyes. Without needing to go to school and without doing anything that caught the public eye, it was his daily routine to focus his eyes, passion, and immerse himself in reading every day. It had been over half a year since he was expelled from Seoul and came down to his hometown. After studying at a private school for nearly 4 years, he was expelled following a school closure incident last autumn and immediately returned to his hometown. Far from showing any signs of despair at being expelled, he returned home overflowing with fresh vigor. Instead of being ashamed, he even carried an air of dignified pride. At first, Haksu and the others were quite surprised by that vibrant energy of his, which showed no shame or fear. Compared to their dark and depressed minds, how enviable were Yonggyol's vibrant energy and radiance. What had divided them, who had spent the same childhood in the same village, into 2 such different paths, was the 4 years Yonggyol spent away from their hometown. During those 4 years in Seoul, what Yonggyol had learned, what he had done, and where his firm convictions came from, were things Haksu had heard, guessed, and learned while frequently visiting his house with Muno. The village viewed Yongjil with suspicion and spread various rumors, but he ignored it all and devoted himself to his studies with fresh passion. That imposing attitude further drew and shook Haksu's heart. "You've been suffering a lot lately, haven't you?" Yongjil roughly knew Haksu's situation and could guess his agony. "Wait, isn't today the wedding day?" Thinking again, Yongjil's dark eyes gleamed brighter as he gave a hearty laugh. When Haksu gave no reply, Yongjil reined in his laughter and changed his tone. "But everyone has one or two personal agonies like that," he continued. "Through going through various agonies, one gradually becomes a proper human being." His voice was calm and heavy, like that of an experienced old man. Haksu also knew well of Yongjil's past unsuccessful romance. A relationship of nearly a year was broken off due to the opponent's intentions and her family's opposition. Of course, it went without saying that the reason for their opposition lay in Yongjil's poverty. Yongjil's agony back then was as great as Haksu's now, and it was from that time that a great shift occurred in his thinking. He ground his teeth and threw himself into reading. In the process, he discovered something greater, something mental to which he could dedicate his rejected passion. Rather than personal agonies, don't we have an even greater agony encompassing all of humanity? He had eventually come to speak like this. "That's why today I too liquidated my personal agony and gained a magnificent, newly surging passion," Haksu said, as if fearing the emotion he felt at the beach would fade, and in an excited tone he recounted his day spent at the beach and the grand emotion he derived from Heine's poetry. "Ha, so there was such a wonderful poem. It's been so long since I read it that I had completely forgotten Heine." Hearing the Heine poem, Yongjil also marveled anew. "Shall I pluck the largest oak tree from the peak of Mount Baekdu, heat it glowing red with the passion in this chest, and vigorously write across the dark heavens, 'Oh, trampled, dang, I love you'?" Though mentioning that the phrase Mount Baekdu seemed a bit skewed, Yongjil recited Haksu's revised version of the poem's lines twice, 3 times, in a moved voice. "Are you there, Yongjil?" At that moment, a familiar voice rang out and the door flew open. The person who entered was Hyungyu from inside the fortress walls. "Hyungyu?" Because Haksu had not anticipated his appearance, he looked at him with gladness after a long time. "Are your studies going well?" Hyungyu replied as briefly as possible while looking at Haksu. To that extent, their relationship and interactions were not particularly close. Because he had entered, the conversation between Haksu and Yongjil was cut off in the middle, and because Haksu was there, the atmosphere between Yongjil and Hyungyu seemed awkward and mismatched. He was also in the same situation as Yongjil. After quitting school midway, he began walking the same path as Yongjil. The two met frequently. However, they skillfully did so without explicitly catching people's eyes. Yongjil seemed to meet with Hyungyu with a different intention and content than when he met with Haksu. Assuming for certain that Hyungju had come tonight with some prior appointment for a specific matter, Haksu stood up from his seat. "Then take these and read them this time." To the departing Haksu, Yongjil pulled down a couple of small booklets from the shelf and handed them to him. Carrying them, Haksu left the house. The declining half-moon shone dimly. 2 young men meeting secretly in a small room. Haksu painted that meaningful scene reliably in his mind. Listening to the sound of some unknown bird crying in the forest in the dead of night, he trudged along the faint night path. The next day, even though he knew full well that he was under suspension for unpaid tuition, Haksu went to school in the afternoon. It was because he knew the Student Council General Assembly was taking place that day. He was determined to attend the General Assembly no matter what. He didn't want to leave the General Assembly, which had a huge direct impact on poor students like them regarding issues like budget allocation, in the hands of immature young classmates to ruin. Classes were canceled, and the General Assembly began immediately in the afternoon. Since they were busy, the General Assembly, which should have been held in April, was often irregularly pushed back to May. The newly built auditorium buzzed noisily. The students were already excited and happy just by the fact that they had no practice labor for the day. The sunlight reflected yellow off the fresh timber colors of the ceiling, walls, and floor. Within it, countless faces shone a sallow, leaf-like yellow. Between the smell of the timber and the smell of sweat, the air in the auditorium was instantly suffocating. Many students were barefoot. Even when someone wore socks, they were mostly torn, hanging only around the arches of their feet. It smelled terribly. Dog oil and sweat glistened on their bare feet, and a sweltering smell rolled over them in hot waves. The assembly proceeded while opening the windows several times to ventilate the air. As soon as the principal's moderation ended, they immediately moved on to determining the budget allocation for each department. With the draft budget prepared by the school in front of them, they started clamoring loudly. Each department defended its own section, refusing to concede even a single penny of the budget. They were just making noise and boiling over. It was nothing more than a swarm of bees fighting. The middle-tier students, who didn't belong to any department and hadn't even held a notebook properly, drifted in the middle, unable to align with either this department or that. Even after 2 hours had passed, the budgets for each department could not be finalized. Haksu, hiding on a bench in the back row, felt dizzy from the sweltering heat. Not belonging to any clear department he could support, he simply watched their fighting coldly without opening his mouth even once. In his mind, he wanted to support the debate club, music club, and arts club over the athletic departments, but for the sake of various more crucial issues that he must spit fire and dumb about after the budget was finalized, he avoided wasting his passion and kept his mouth firmly shut. The matter of completely opposing the accumulation of funds for sports away games, which became an issue every year. This was the most important item. Next, various items he had to fight for and seize for the benefit of the general student body, such as opposing the accumulation of the student council base fund and entrance fees, and the matter of distributing the profits from family practice labor to the families, swirled around in his chest. Only after almost 4 hours had passed was the budget somehow finalized, and the debate over the away game funds began. Due to the far distance from Seoul, sports away games, especially for tennis and soccer, incurred massive costs. Because it was impossible to cover with the meager student council fees, they had somehow patched it up with donations and the like in the past. But starting this year, a proposal arose from the school authorities to specially increase the monthly student council fee to fill the away game funds. The plan was to bring this proposal to the General Assembly and decide its fate. After the principal's explanation, Da Vang, the head of the athletic department, immediately stood up from the staff seating. He emphasized the necessity of disciplined team sports over unorganized individual exercises and delivered a speech urging support for the accumulation of away game funds accordingly. Outraged by his intention to steer the direction of mass opinion before the students even had a chance to express theirs, Haksu stood up from his seat and struck the first blow. If it cannot be covered with the current student council fees, let's stop the away games. In our situation, is there any need to pay extra fees just to go on away games? Let's avoid foolish herd behavior. The hall went as silent as if water had been poured over it. Young students often don't know what is the right thing to do and wander aimlessly. Knowing this well, Haksu stood there and continued speaking, determined to guide them in the right direction with a poignant impression. For us, children of poor farmers who find even the current tuition excessive, this mere 20 jeon is by no means a small amount of money. When we are struggling to even pay our current tuition, do we have the luxury to pay more on top of that? Let us all refrain from thoughtless blind actions. As soon as he sat down, a soccer player from another grade stood up and, with a tongue that didn't roll quite right, spoke of the necessity of away games. Then, he practically begged for their support, saying that they intended to make the championship flag they had won in past away games a permanent possession of the school. The championship flag, realizing that this was what was blinding and leading the immature minds astray, Haksu raised his voice even higher. You, who speak like that, think carefully first. Is it right that so many people must make sacrifices they don't even want just to produce one player, one hero? What has one player brought us? A championship flag? It is nothing more than a piece of useless scarecrow cloth with no substance. The school's honor? What does that even do? What benefit has that sort of honor brought us? A championship flag, honor, they are nothing but a kind of vanity. Comrades, let's oppose the player away games. Let's oppose the accumulation of away game funds. That's right, oppose the away game funds. Voices of agreement erupted from every corner. Tynesine's face turned red, and the staff seating area rustled with movement. From the underclassmen's seating, a young student stood up, drawing the wriggling gazes and attention entirely onto himself. Wearing a Western-style suit patched with a huge piece on the back, he wiped the sweat pouring down his forehead and spoke in a thin voice. Practice labor. That is an excellent exercise for us. What other exercise do we need besides this? Proper physical education is enough. We don't need skills and talents beyond that. We are so healthy, yet we are poor and hungry. So is there any need to exercise even more on top of this and starve our stomachs further? He pulled a towel from his waistband, wiped his sweat, hesitated for a good while, and sat down. Laughter burst out loudly at that comedic effect. To organize the rustling hall, Haksu stood up again and raised his voice even higher. That's right, 30 characters omitted. Do we have the courage to further torment our suffering families? When our tuition is a few days late and our homeroom teacher calls us in to subtly urge us to quit school, 25 characters omitted, we must consider our circumstances. The acute sense of reality born from sharing the same situation and lifestyle flipped and shook his comrades' hearts. That's right. Let's stop the accumulation of away game funds. Voices of approval rang out so loudly it seemed they would lift the auditorium. Haksu! Haksu! Amidst the uproar, a sharp yell was suddenly heard. The staff seating area swayed chaotically, and from within it, his angry face glared fiercely at Haksu. Haksu! You leave this hall immediately. You haven't paid your tuition, and you have no right to sneak in and attend the General Assembly. He feigned ignorance as if nothing had happened, and nonchalantly returned home. His mother ran out to the front gate. Haksu. Seeing her soot-stained face and hearing her unusual voice, Haksu looked at his flustered mother. Haksu, Gumok is. His mother ran over and grabbed the hem of his clothes. Gumok is. Seeing the tears welling up in his mother's eyes, Haksu was startled and asked, What happened to Gumok? He passed away. What? She fell into the sea. Jumok is dead? Jumok is. What on earth happened? She kept calling your name all day on her wedding day and then ran away from the bridal room in the middle of the night. So where is she now? Where is she now? All of Gumok's family members have rushed to the sea. Earlier, people from the harbor came running to tell us they recovered the body. Everyone has rushed to the beach now. The sea, Gumok. In his shock, Haksu frantically bolted out. He sprinted the 5-ride distance toward the sea without stopping. The very spot where Haksu had spent a day reading Heine a few days ago to forget his love was the place Gumok had chosen for her final moment. That pitiful heart of hers, specifically choosing the place that held so many memories, made Haksu mourn her even more deeply. The sound of wailing flowed by the water's edge. Her family members surrounded the body, tearing at their chests and crying chaotically. The body with its covered face, it was a gruesome sight to behold. It was not a human body, but a water barrel. Water spilled from her mouth as if from a spring. She was still wearing the same new clothes she wore on her wedding day. Perhaps because she had just been pulled from the sea, water dripped constantly from her entire body. Only that spot on the sand was soaking wet. It was a maddening state of mind. Haksu rushed in and collapsed heavily on that spot. He removed the towel and looked at her face. The traces of rouge, washed by the water, had spread faintly across her distorted face. Her half-open white eyes looked at Haksu as if in resentment. Gumok, her face was cold as stone. Why did you go so early? His chest grew hot as if it would burst and tears welled up. Haksu, why did you let this happen? Gumoke's mother looked at Haksu as if resentful and handed him a photograph she was holding. Who would have ever dreamed she would die holding Haksu's picture? He took it and saw it was a picture of him he had given her some time ago. Instead of Haksu, she had gone holding his soulless photograph. When he peeled back the cover, the blurred handwriting, smudged by the water, was faintly legible. Haksu, I am going. In this valley blocked like a massive mountain, I took this easiest path. Having offered my affection only to you, I go with a pure body. Since I go alone, I will never resent you. Study hard and save your poor family. In the end, it is my fault for being foolish, but I didn't know you would go so easily. Haksu placed the body on his lap and stroked her cold face. Gomoke, Haksu is here. Gomoke, open your eyes. Her mother sat across from him, massaging her cold limbs, rocking her body back and forth and weeping. Haksu, what are we supposed to do now that you've ruined an innocent life? If things were like that, wouldn't it have been better if you had spoken up sooner before the wedding? Jomoke is gone. What are we supposed to do? The wailing sounds seemed to slowly grind away at Haksu's bones. Let us take her home. Haksu gathered his tears and stood up. Jomoke, did you leave just to come back into the house looking like this? Jomok's father raised the body. I will carry her. Because it was too pitiful to carry her on a stretcher, Haksu hoisted the body onto his back. She was heavy as stone. It was an unfeeling, emotionless physical body that possessed only the sensation of weight. Dripping water drew a line over the sand and the road. A small procession stretched across the road. The sounds of wailing rang out mournfully over the darkening field. Because her short life had been so wretched, Haksu did not leave Gomok's side and watched over her. The scent of burning incense, it was an all too poignant contrast to the fragrance of the moonlit night he had smelled when they last met in the apple orchard a few days ago. The melted wax from the candles dripped down Lil Ike tears. Due to unavoidable circumstances, this novel will omit the 6 installments in the middle and conclude with the final installment today. The day of Gimoke's funeral arrived. A thick fog settled in heavily. It was a sorrowful day, like her young soul departing in solitude. It was an overly brief funeral procession. Too brief, much like her youth that departed so quickly. Her in-laws entirely abandoned her soul that had betrayed them and left, and the funeral was hastily arranged entirely by her own family. Right behind the bier stood Haksu, and behind him followed her family members. The brief procession seemed ready to vanish into the fog at any moment, as if trying to bury her lonely soul quietly in secret. Even the ringing sound of the handbell at the front vanished piece by piece into the fog. Thick fog gathered on Haksu's eyelashes as well, streaming down along with his tears. The leaves of young plants trembled faintly in the fog as if shivering at the sound of the bell. Turning the corner of the mountain spur, the procession entered the mountain valley. By the time they reached the cemetery, the bier was completely soaked in sorrow and fog. To Haksu, for whom burying a dead body was a first experience, the act felt too gruesome, like scraping at his very bones. Flesh was being buried in the wet earth. As a human ritual, was there anything more atrocious than this? Pouring tears wet the soil. You go with her as well. Haksu threw the poetry book of Heine he had carried, the very book he had read at the beach thinking of Gomok, into Gomok's grave alongside her coffin. As a final gift, sending Gomok off, instead of scattering flowers over her coffin, he threw in the songs they had read together while she was alive. At the same time, this served as permanently burying his own sorrowful past. Just as he had gained the grand passion to pluck the largest oak tree from the peak of Mount Baekdu, from the Heine poetry book he was burying, from Gumok's death sprang an indescribable kind of power that wasn't solely comprised of sorrow. I will guard your soul while I work and fight until my strength is exhausted. When the poetry book and the coffin had completely disappeared into the earth, Haksu sprinkled more soil over them, packing down that small grave with tears of blood and words of sorrow. Before he knew it, the twilight deepened, and the fog grew thicker. I too shall leave. No matter how long he cried, his sorrow only renewed itself. There was no end to it. With the passion gained from the poetry and the strength gained from death, Haksu left the front of the grave. However, instead of stepping backward and turning onto the village path, he set his steps forward straight ahead toward the mountain pass. Where are you going? Gomoke's family asked. I am going to a faraway place over the pass. A faraway place? What is there to hope for by living here? After answering, Haksu muttered inwardly to himself. I will go to a faraway place and pave a path so that I can walk the road Yongeol walked. Bidding them farewell, Haksu headed for the pass. He intended to take a train from the station over the pass and head absolutely anywhere. Where to? It's too vague. But doesn't everything open up and begin from a place of vagueness? Vague adventure and leaps, can one do great things without these? As he crested the pass, the streets looked down below, and the station could be made out within them. What about father, the family? At the final moment of parting with his hometown, various thoughts swelled up inside him all at once. If I faithfully attended school, could I fundamentally save my father and our household? Rather than that, it is much better to go now and pave a grand path for the future. Muttering this, he clenched his fists tightly. Father, Gumok, Muno and the rest, hometown, stay well all of you. The day will come when we meet Ain with grander faces. Shedding tears, Haksu turned his back on his hometown. With every step he took walking down the pass, his resolve in his heart only renewed itself further. Our story ends as the young protagonist turns his back on his sorrow, stepping forward into the unknown mist with a heavy but resolute heart. I hope his quiet strength and poignant journey have brought a sense of calm reflection to your own night. Whatever burdens you carry today, leave them here in the quiet darkness of the past. Thank you for spending this slow, peaceful night with me. Close your eyes, let go, and sleep well. Good night.